This video is sponsored by OWC. A couple of weeks ago, Apple officially updated its budget entry-level iPhone for 2022 with the new iPhone SE. And actually, just a few days ago, the new Samsung Galaxy A53 5G was just released, and this is definitely a similar price point and more of a direct competitor to Apple's iPhone SE. So in this video, we're just going to go over some of the key differences and features that you might get between each device. So we're just going to jump right to it. This phone, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, if you were just looking head-to-head between features and what you get from this phone compared to the iPhone SE, this one definitely wins. However, there are some differences, a couple of differences and things that the iPhone SE offers that the A53 5G does not, and some of those might be very important to you. So it is worth kind of watching the rest of this video to see what those differences are and how they might apply to the way you would use your device. But right off the bat, the first thing you're going to look at is the display. And this is a 6.5-inch 1080p full AMOLED display. And I do want to go right out and say this. I've said this a million times. Samsung just makes some of the best displays out there. Their flagships, I think, are better than the iPhone's flagships. And it carries on down to this device. It's a much better display. The iPhone's display is barely 720 at this point, which is crazy to think about in 2022. But so this is a 1080p screen. It's very bright. It's a very vibrant. It looks pretty much up to the quality of some of the flagship Samsung devices. And it also offers 120 hertz refresh rate. Now, I'm not totally sure if that's a catch-22 here because I have noticed some weird scrolling issues, and that could be performance as well, and we'll touch on that and more here in a minute. But it does offer that, for the most part, buttery smooth, scrolling that you would get with 120 hertz, but you're not getting that on the iPhone SE. You barely get it on the iPhone 13 lineup. You actually have to go with a Pro model in order to get that, and that's about $800 more than any of these phones. So yeah, with that said, it is a really nice thing to have included in the A53. Another thing you'll notice when you look at both of these displays right next to each other is that this one goes pretty much edge to edge. It has a single hole punch cutout. That does not exist on any iPhone across the board, though we do have a notch for some of the premium iPhones. But with the iPhone SE, you still have that glorious big chunky top and bottom bezels and the home button, which does give you Touch ID. And while we're on the subject of Touch ID, this phone gives you a ultrasonic fingerprint reader, which it's not bad. It's definitely slower than Touch ID, and it's definitely less accurate than Touch ID. But if it means having, this full display looking phone, I just prefer this much more than the iPhone SE. And not to mention the iPhone SE has a 4.7-inch display, much smaller. Some of you might like that, so that could be a feature in the direction of the SE. For me, I prefer my devices a little bit bigger. So this is what you get in terms of look and feel, and I would much rather have a slightly worse fingerprint sensor than the Touch ID physical home button if it means removing the bezels. However, you do also get up here with the single camera, you do get a face unlock. Now, it is not Face ID level quality. It is not secure enough to do password authentication as well as authentication for payments. So you will have to use the fingerprint sensor, but you do get both. And that's not something you do get with any iPhone. So just something worth pointing out. The rest of the phone, I will say in terms of build quality, definitely swings in the direction of the iPhone SE. It's fully glass. It's very strong glass. It's a much more premium phone to hold. The aluminum on the sides, it just feels better. It's just a much better built phone compared to the plastic with a matte finish so that you don't have so many fingerprints showing. But, this is mostly plastic here, and it's just not nearly as premium feeling as the iPhone SE. And one quick thing about premium feeling, haptic feedback. Most people probably won't care about haptic feedback, but I do think it's important, and it does signify for the most part which phones are kind of skimping out on some costs, and Samsung skimped out on the haptic feedback. It feels like every other very low-end budget Android phone that I've ever used. The iPhone has the same haptic feedback and feeling that you would get from any iPhone across the board, and it just feels better. And if you're somebody who lives their life on Vibrate, I think that might be a little bit more important to you than you might think. So it's just something worth pointing out. But again, not a total game changer by any means. While we're on the subject of the back of the phone, you will notice that there are far more cameras than the iPhone SE. The iPhone SE has a single 12 megapixel wide angle lens. That is actually the only thing we're going to compare in terms of photos. As you can see, some of the photos that are on screen right now. I would love to know your thoughts on any of these photos in the comments down below. But yeah, I'm only going to do the wide because that's all that this phone has, but the Samsung Galaxy A53 does have, so that wide angle lens is the main sensor. It's actually a 64 megapixel wide angle lens. Larger megapixel count does not always translate into better photos. We have learned that with the iPhone that has had 12 megapixels for years, and it still produces better photos than many of the phones out there. So just worth pointing out, this is a 64 megapixel wide angle sensor. Then there's an ultra wide sensor, and then a depth and macro sensor. So just something to keep in mind. If you want more cameras, then this is the phone to consider. Another quick thing to point out when it comes to the cameras, when video recording specifically, the A53 can shoot in 4K, but only up to 30 frames per second. The iPhone SE can do up to 60. So again, another thing worth pointing out. But if you're heavily considering cameras, there's far more versatility with the A53 compared to Apple's single camera setup on the back. And then jumping down here to the bottom of the phone, you do have a SIM card tray, but that doubles as a SD card slot, a micro SD card slot, so that you can expand storage, something that has never been on the iPhone and is definitely not on the iPhone SE. For internal storage, the iPhone SE starts at 64 gigs. This starts at a minimum of 128. So you're already getting double the storage compared to the iPhone SE. Also, next to it here is a USB-C port, something that a lot of companies and manufacturers use for charging. And of course, the iPhone is still using Lightning, which is fine if you're already in the Apple ecosystem and you have a bunch of Lightning cables. But if you don't, you're going to have to buy a bunch of cables where you might already have a USB-C cord laying around somewhere that you can use to charge. Speaking of charging, this charges at a fast rate of 25 watts. The iPhone SE charges at 18 watts for fast charging. However, the iPhone SE does have wireless charging, whereas this is plastic. It does not wirelessly charge. Also, when it comes to the battery life on the A53 is right now a lot better than the iPhone SE, and that shouldn't really come as a surprise to you, considering that this has more than double the capacity at 5,000 milliamp hours for battery compared to Apple's 2,000, just a little over 2,000 for the iPhone SE. And for the most part, that wraps up a lot of the things that is really, really good on the A53, and that's a lot of stuff. But I think that's where a lot of the good stops, and there is a shorter list for the iPhone SE, but I do think some of the things are a little bit more important. So I already touched that the build quality is better, in my opinion, on the iPhone SE. The internals, there is a much, much faster processor inside of the iPhone SE. In fact, for those of you who do not know, the iPhone SE has the A15 chip, which is the same processor that the iPhone 13 has. So it's pretty much right up to par in terms of performance with the flagship highest end iPhone. That is not the same with Samsung's Exynos chip that is inside of this mid-range phone. But the performance actually was really hit or miss with me. Honestly, I still can't tell if it's the 120 hertz screen that's been kind of messing around with some of the lag and stutters that I've noticed with daily scrolling and moving about the operating system, especially when going home. I've noticed that swiping up gesture just does not play well sometimes, and it just takes an extra second or two to really pick up on what you're doing. I never have that problem with the iPhone. There are no swipe gestures with this one, but the home button works really well. I just don't notice any performance lag at all with the iPhone. I am noticing some with this. Now, most of the time though, daily use, it's been good. I don't know how well it's gonna hold, up over time. It's still very early in this process, but it's just something to keep in mind. But I really do strongly believe that this phone will hold up better in performance way, way, way longer than this phone. So it's definitely a matter of short term. What are you looking for? Higher end, flashier features. This is the phone. If you're looking for 5 to 7 years of consistent good performance, and my next thing that I want to highlight, software updates, then it's no doubt going to be the iPhone. So for reference, the iPhone SE in 2016, the first one that ever came out, it is 6 years old and it still has the latest operating system, which is iOS 15. I mean, I could be wrong, but I have never seen in a budget phone or even a high-end phone go 6 years and get the latest version of Android. I'm not saying it's not possible, but just looking at the trends, Samsung barely pushes the latest update within a calendar year of the release from Google to its higher end phones. It takes a long time. Going 2 or 3 years is just not something that happens. So again, if you're looking for long term, this is definitely not going to be it when you're comparing it to the iPhone SE. Before I wrap it up, I do want to point out that it is, obvious with the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, since it's in the name, that this runs on the 5G networks. And so does this. This was also updated to feature, that was one of the main features of this phone. It also runs on 5G. So that shouldn't be anything that you really need to worry about when it comes to each phone. If 5G is important to you, they both have it. This phone starts at $349. Now it is MSRP'd at $449, but on Samsung's website right now, it's what I'm going off of. At the time of this video, you can get it for $349 for 128 gigs of internal storage. This goes for $429, and it only has 64 gigs of internal storage. You cannot expand via micro SD like you can with this phone. So those are just things worth pointing out. And so I would go with this one if you're looking for a phone to last you 1 or 2 years and you want some of the higher end features and you don't care about slightly less performance, because all you really needed to do is, surf Twitter, TikTok, watch a couple of YouTube videos, message. It should be fine in handling that. Although I do think this will probably do better in the long run. If you don't care about that, then go with this one. But those are just my thoughts. I'd love to know yours in the comments down below. This has been Dan with Mac Rumors. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you around in the next video. Now, before we end today's video, I do want to give you more information about today's sponsor, OWC. This is OWC's USB-C dual HDMI 4K display adapter with display link, and it solves the problem and allows users to connect 2 HDMI 4K displays via a single Thunderbolt port for M1 Macs, but also really just any Mac or PC that might want to do this. The adapter is bus powered, and it features an integrated USB-C cable for easy use while on the go. It's very portable and allows HDMI pass-through support for audio signals to pass through the adapter and onto the connected displays. And so for more information about this adapter or really any other product that OWC has to offer, visit the link in the description down below. This has been Dan with Mac Rumors. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you around in the next video.